Hi there, it's Dr. JOYLYN Sparkles and welcome to your Power Hour. This is your time to put what's on your mind on my mind, and we'll put our heads and hearts together and come up with a way to go from stuck to happy as fuck in as short amount of time as possible. All right, that's the goal, because time saving, because we all got better stuff to do than play another game and run around our little rut another time with a limiting belief, okay? It's getting a little bit boring if we're really honest with ourselves. And why wouldn't we be honest with ourselves? What is there to gain by not, okay? All right, today is exciting because we had a question come in from a member, thank you Martha, who asked, how do you get the confidence to speak up? And so I just want to say again that this is your space to put what's on your mind on my mind, and I'll give you my 2 cents. That's what it's for, is to get some real talk, not just fluffy, and hopefully in some way, shape, or form it will give you an aha, some inspiration, and a lot of times I like to work in tips. Now this one's interesting because I think I look at things a little bit different. And so how do you get the confidence to speak up? Oh, one other thing. I hate when people talk about what they're going to talk about forever. Like I could talk about that for 15 more minutes. So that's where this is a no fluff zone, all right? Because we're just going to dig right in, okay? Confidence comes through doing, in doing, by doing, not before. That is probably the biggest limiting block to the whole idea of building confidence, is that it comes before you do something. And that's a myth. It's actually totally backwards. Even the science is behind it. And I should grab the book. I can't remember the title, but he's talking all about rethinking. And it's really that confidence comes through being engaged with and going through a process. And so where we all think I'll be confident enough and then I'll go do something, it's really by the endeavoring and trial and erroring and struggling and possibly failing and making it through. That's actually how we gain confidence. Now, yeah, it seems like we uptick that even more when our outcome is successful and we feel like we really mastered it. But actually, all the studies show that because depending on our perspective about how we frame and interpret the failure or whatever the outcome is, that's actually what boosts the confidence, is how we're interpreting the data. Because when we fail, a lot of times it's actually easier to identify what didn't work. And if we succeed, even though we think that that's when I'll be confident, is when I succeed and it goes exactly the way, if our brains are totally wired to negative self-talk, we'll tell ourselves it's just a fluke and we got lucky and we have no idea how to do it again. And so having desirable outcomes don't always in and of themselves mean we're going to end up confident. Confidence is built, and it's built on, by, and through choosing to follow through. Okay? So confidence comes through a process, and it's the perspective with how we are interpreting the data that comes from the outcome. Now, what is great about this, though, is when we do this process and we follow through, and that's where you'll see every day. We're in day 7 of the self-love experiment because it is a testament to self-love to throw yourself out there, to leap off the branch and flap your wings, to actually, sometimes it feels like flying by the seat of the pants, even though you've done trial runs or you've seen somebody else do it. But when it's up to you and you got to do it, there's self-love behind that. If there's an attitude of self-love behind that, of I want to see what happens. I value me enough to actually be with me through this. And then when we come to the end of whatever process, data gathering, collection period, whatever the speaking up moment was or is that we've been working on, when we make it through, at the end of that, we actually have one piece of irrefutable evidence that from that moment on till the day we die, we'll never, ever, like we've totally laid to rest, I wonder what if. because we actually did. And in doing it, took a slice, sometimes a whole huge chunk out of the fuel of our limiting beliefs that say that our subconscious survival brain is saying, you might die. This is going to go badly. You might die. You will certainly die, But when we come to the end and we reflect on that, that's one piece of evidence that we will have for sure. I didn't die. It may or may not have been uncomfortable as hell. It may or may not have gone the way that you wanted. You might have ended up with more friends, with more people agreeing with your point of view. You might have ended up with harsh enemies and critics. But one thing that you get to see is I'm still standing. And I did it. Nobody else did it. I didn't hide. I didn't shrink. I met the moment. And that's where a lot of what we are going to be doing and what I'm showing in the self-love experiment, hopefully, is that as your self-love increases, that in and through this process, you're with yourself each step of the way. And so one of the reasons we may or may not have succeeded before is we've done it halfway. We've, liked the idea, started it, but then when it got really intense inside, tucked tail and ran. Ran up here, started with the squirrely minds, worst case scenarios, I can't believe I did that, and interpreting all the data as negative. Sometimes getting to a point and abandoning me, oh no, never mind, no, forget it, and we'll start to placate and become complacent again. But every single one of those is just like having weights on your back and doing a squat. You'll know that even in the Olympics, they may or may not be able to rise to that challenge that day and won't be able to do the full rep. But every time they do it, it's building muscle memory of this is what I want you to do. And that's all that the confidence is going to come when we start shifting our perspective and saying, this is what I'm training myself to do. Because for a lot of us who have trouble speaking up, and a lot of you probably assume I've always been naturally talkative, I wasn't. I even joke that I came in with a decoy. I came in hiding behind an identical twin, thinking that the coolest thing about me was her, and as long as she was there, I was fine, I could hide, and I was a good girl in school. I didn't talk much. I didn't talk out of line for sure. And then when people from high school are like, oh, I remember you, I'm like, really? How? I didn't say that much. I really had an art of being invisible, to where so much of my process has been learning to say stuff. I used to be in high school, a lot of times, I would be the one who waited and hoped somebody else would ask my question. I didn't want to ask it. And then finally going through college and finally in medical school, I'm like, I just got tired of waiting for people. So sometimes even the things that I've judged myself for, like being impatient, has actually sometimes turned out to be a gift for me because I just got tired of waiting to see if somebody else would do it and putting myself on somebody else's timeline, okay? It's just about changing how we're viewing ourselves and what we're valuing and what we want to get. Okay, so I got a little off my outline. I'm going to go back on. So, if you're here in this group and Martha, badass, absolutely badass. And what I mean by badass is a willingness to face things, a willingness to ask questions that will open things up and change things, a willingness to be open to hearing things that aren't comfortable, that we don't like, wish that it wasn't the truth, but are actually willing to face it. That to me is badass. And I'll even say, like, juxtaposing it to my ex-husband, who was a rad dude. He was a phenomenal downhill mountain biker. Rad. Would jump off shit on his snowboard, that I was way too cautious to try. Things would get really too fast and I'd, French fry that or like pizza that to curb some speed or, make a turn because I didn't want to get too fast, and he was the opposite. But I'm way more badass because I'm willing to be like, is this true? Is this true about me? Is this how I want it to be? It was true. Do I want it to be anymore? And I'd be willing to have some really uncomfortable conversations with other people, with myself, to be willing to apologize for stuff and feeling the intense feelings of wrongness, and he wasn't. So you being here, willing to ask questions, that's what makes you badass. And the confidence comes second when we actually decide to see about realizing our badassery. That's where the confidence comes from, okay? So what happens though when we're looking for how do I get to be more confident to speak up? What a lot of us have done and have been sort of even educationally modeled or taught that this is the process is you'll do it theoretically enough and then you'll feel ready and then it'll work. And for most of us, that's never actually been true. There is a time where you have to be introduced to a new idea, okay? And a skill set. Here's the how, okay? But when it comes to speaking up, this shit already works, okay? You're past the age of 2. You can form full and complete words, sentences, syllables, even experiment in trying it in a different language, okay? Now, what you may or may not have any experience or a lot of witness modeling is seeing somebody effectively speak up, because what we've seen most often is the training that we got was people putting themselves back, waiting for somebody else to ask the question, waiting for somebody else to acknowledge their turn to speak, waiting for somebody to congratulate or celebrate them on a job well done. And when it doesn't come, we start to get a little bit resentful. Or we tolerate because we're nice and we don't want to rock the boat. And a lot of times, honestly, when deep down we know that we're strong people, we let people call us bad names or say, because, oh, it's fine, and we can tolerate a little bit more than we should until it really bothers us. And then what happens is then we judge ourselves for not saying something sooner and judging ourselves and not forgiving ourselves for not acknowledging that in that moment, not speaking up was actually our best because of our training, our history, our modeling, all of that, and saying I should have done better. And that judgment piles on and piles on and piles on. And our pain level increases to where then it's trigger. So that's when what we want to do is we want to feel ready to speak up, and we think that we're automatically going to know when that is and when to say, when to interject, when to say something and what to say. And we think that's just going to be automatic when we've never really actually done it, other than after the conversation, when we had a conversation, or before the conversation when we thought it was going to go this way. But we wait till it's too amped inside, and we're waiting for a feeling that we actually may or may not even recognize when it comes. And so then it's, we're trigger happy and it comes out harsh. It comes out raw, rough. And so if we wait until we really feel ready, and if we maintain this false belief that somehow we're going to automatically be good at something that we've never really practiced, like other than just in our head and theoretical, we're going to set ourselves up for failure. At the same time, there is this growing heart voice that says, I want to speak. It's my turn to be heard. I have something to say. That the more that we keep being, oh, next time, oh, I didn't feel it, oh, it wasn't this time because of this or that. My mom keeps always saying, oh, it's because we're on the phone and not in person. And I was like, that's what we got. If you keep waiting for something else, it isn't going to happen. Because here was this time, and this time that we were in person. We still didn't talk about this stuff, so that's just an excuse. And if we still live by that, life and the universe, which you are part of and your heart's going to call it in, is going to force a circumstance where there is no other option but to speak up. That's when it's like you hit rock bottom and it's really awful, and you look back and see all of the times that you could have, and then you have extra work of forgiveness to do, okay? But we all have done that in the relationship where it was finally like it was do or die and the relationship just ended because even if you spoke up at this point, even when you spoke up at this point, it was too far gone, okay? Because our heart says, I've got something to say. I know what I want and I want to speak up. So life, because you're calling for it and the universe has your back, it will create a circumstance where no other option becomes available, okay? Or what we'll do is when it starts to get amped, we get angry. And that anger, we often misinterpret it as something's wrong, I've done something wrong, or they've done something wrong, because anger is an activator. A lot of times it'll get us over that hump of fear so that we generate anger and boost ourselves up. But when we require that type of charge to get up and over the hump of our fear of speaking up, it generally doesn't go well. It doesn't tend to be effective because when we get really triggered, we tend to lead with that emotional piece and that energy to where whoever we're talking to, be it ourselves or any other person, they only hear the energy, this whoo. It's like, you know, when you open the oven and that hot air comes out, that's what people get. So they're not even hearing your words. So, and when you're that angry and just, it's rarely coherent, you know, because only bits and pieces. That's when we end up like George Costanza. That's what I should have said after the fact. So it's hardly ever coherent. It's often not tactful. It's that hot air, let alone elegant or effective, you know? And so to build the confidence to speak up is really going to require speaking up before we feel ready, before we feel confident. Because the confidence is going to come from doing it. If we wait until we feel ready, that may or may not ever actually come. And so then all of the attempts that come before that are going to be emotionally charged. And then we're going to build this evidence base of, see, this is why I don't do it, because it never turns out the way that I wanted it to. So what is our alternative then? How do you then, if the confidence isn't going to come until I do it, but I'm scared as shit to do it, or I see myself keep shrinking, how do I get over that without a bunch of anger or requiring life to make it so freaking unpleasant I can't not? Here is how. You change what you're curious about. Curiosity, I love, because we've all heard and know very well gratitude. Gratitude will change your brain. But there are some cases where gratitude, it's like that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't super make sense as far as I'm trying not to, how do I figure that out before? And then it's hard for me to feel gratitude when I have all this evidence of it not working well. And to where sometimes for me, even gratitude can be charged because I feel like I should be able to do it and I'm not. And then I just go into judgment. Okay. Curiosity though, I'm naturally curious, and actually most of us are, but it is something that we have conscious control over and we can direct it with questions, okay? So, when we become curious, we change our brain chemistry and the brainwave patterns to where we become more open to information, and actually then curious, it's just going to keep coming out. We actually wonder about the experience, which is what actually intrinsically kind of flows through us and moves us through and past the fear without as much clenching and halting. So with that, it's really important though, when I talk about in my tenets of personal coaching, the slow down to speed up, a lot of us have been ready to speak up or wanted to see us show up this way for a long time, so let me just go. And hey, you can. I'm in Aries, I totally get that. Fling yourself off the cliff and the net will appear, right? Like, the universe has your back, something will come up from it, and it's all an experiment. But if it's a relationship that does matter to you, if it's an outcome that does matter to you, pausing and taking just a little bit of time to check in and direct your curiosity so that you can have a better approach might help. So one is when we're just talking about straight getting over the fear and just getting curious about you as someone who speaks up. Like, who are you? What does that even mean? When you see yourself speak up, is it loud? Is it in your normal tone of voice? Is it face to face? Is it over the phone? Is it in writing? Because we always think speaking up is only one way. There's so many ways. When you're thinking of speaking up, what does it mean about you, whether you do or don't? Because again, a lot of times we set ourselves up for failure and a whole lot of judgment when we perceive ourselves and interpret ourselves as a failure if we don't. Instead of saying, and instead of acknowledging the entirety of the experience, I saw me pass that up again. I'm going to remember how this feels and I don't like it, so I'm going to do it different next time. You know, like Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you'll do better. So if you acknowledge the entirety of the experience, you get the wealth of that experience, and then you can know better, for real, instead of just judge yourself harsher, okay? But if I'm somebody that speaks up, what does that even look like to me? What does that even mean like to me? What does it mean if I do or don't? And then when it comes to actually thinking about having this conversation, a super important piece that is so often missed, especially in intimate relationships, but in all of them, is what do I actually want the outcome to be? What am I actually speaking to and for? Because what happens a lot of times is this thing that needs to speak up. And a lot of times when it's I gotta say something, sometimes, oftentimes, not all the time, but very frequently, it's the ego that actually has to say something right now. It has to say something. And if it's our ego that we're trying to protect and preserve, and let me tell you, it's subtle. So it's not going to wear a flag and be like, it's me that's trying to hide. It's going to be our sense of self. It's going to be our free time. It's going to be who we think we are. That's why getting an idea of who we think we are in the first place might be important. But if that's what we're trying, if we're trying to speak up that has anything defensive about it, regardless of how or what words you say, you're going to be that hot air coming out at somebody because it isn't actually based in truth. We have to get clear on, am I actually looking to create greater connection with myself, with this other person, or am I seeking clarity, about myself, about a situation, to gather facts? Then it's a much cleaner agenda. It's going to be much better received. And a lot of times, again, when we're shifting the curiosity, and even it can even be brought into conversation and kind of keep some of the levity or curiosity available in the moment, is to be like, hey, I want to say this thing, and to be quite honest, I actually just want to see what it feels like if I actually say something that I've been afraid to say. And then the person who's hearing it will know it's not about them. It's not a personal attack. Because sometimes, it took me a great long time in my marriage to say, I don't like when you do that. Because I kept thinking that I shouldn't have any opinion about what somebody else does. But when you leave your shoes in the middle of a hallway and I trip on them, that's annoying to me. Now, what I originally did, was be like, who the fuck does this? That's dumb. And that's what I'd lead with, And that was the tact and effectiveness that I was speaking up with. Instead of being, hey, I'm really tired of tripping on your shoes. Can you move those, please, when you take them off instead of taking them off right here? Is there a better place? Is there a space? And then it became, the team building was, you get to live here too, and I'm tired of tripping on the shoes. How do we both get our needs met? And then it becomes collaboration, okay? Then your communication becomes much more effective. And then also what's interesting is some of the second question is, when you talk about what does it mean if you do or don't, and when you become clear about what's the outcome, if you are trying to get someone else to change, that means that their behavior is determining or has something to do with your worth and importance. And then no matter if you win, you lose. Because nothing anybody else does or says has anything to do with your worth. But it might be that limiting belief of what it actually means to be listened to and heard. Because I knew when early in my marriage, about the first 5.5 to 6 years, to be listened to meant that he did what I said. To be listened to meant I only had to ask once. And that was a stumbling block in my business, thinking that if I put something on Facebook Live, there it was for the world to see. And if they didn't get it, I guess they just didn't want it. So, I don't want to be obnoxious and say things over and over. But the human brain, and with all the things that we're going through and with, and the technology and distractions that are available, and like our shortening attention span, like, yeah, people have to hear something more than once and it has nothing to do with your importance. It may appear that way sometimes when somebody says something and all of a sudden things change, but they'd probably likely heard it many times before, or it was something they were already curious about changing, and that was the piece of information that the universe granted them at the time they were open and ready to have it. We have to stop judging by appearances, and our worth cannot be tied in to like whether or not we're received, whether or not they agree, whether or not they want to be friends with us at the end of a conversation. If our worth and our self-esteem and our willingness to speak up again after that is tied to that, then it's likely setting ourselves up for failure. So being curious about those things, and then if we've got that going on, all right, like I really just want more harmony in my home, but I cannot pretend to be happy about this thing that is really, chafing my ass here. Like I gotta say something. And if I don't say something, things will stay exactly as they are. And I've lived that way for 20 some years. So, hey, I won't die. But if I do say something, it might actually be interesting to see if I can do it well, if I can do it at all, like if I'll rise. Because I've tried to think, oh, and here's another thing. Here's a little tip. Cut the build up. When it comes to conversation, it's not sex. You don't need a lot of foreplay. And women especially, and over communicators, there I am. Hey, I have a question. Is it okay if I ask you something? Then they're like, oh shit, how do I eat my foot and get out of this room right now? Hey, I want to say something, but I'm afraid of how it's going to come out. That works better women to women. But if you're talking to a man, just be a little bit more direct. And honestly, the more direct we are, if you almost become like an editor and write out what you want to say and cut out about half the words, it's really, I don't like how this is going, can we change it? And a lot of times the person's like, sure, what do you have in mind? Then, I don't know, don't throw it back in their lap, okay? That's where having a little slow down to speed up can really help, okay? But then you put on your scientist hat. There is no way to know how it's actually going to turn out until you actually do it. Now, I know some of this, sometimes it does get a little confusing with the science. Your brain can't tell real from imagined, blah, blah, blah. Now, the benefit of that is you can practice and get some of these feelings and chemicals running in your body. But what you want to do is actually picture it going the way that you'd like, but only you. Now, what that means is what a lot of us do is go in our heads and see it going, and here's what I say, and it's like mic drop and boom, just like a soap opera or a, sitcom, oh, that was it. They couldn't even speak. And then they immediately said, you're right, I'm sorry. That only happens when they have 22 minutes and it's almost time to go to commercial, okay? It doesn't hardly ever happen in real life, to where then we can't think of this is how they're going to respond and it's going to feel so good. It's actually, how's it going to feel if I open my mouth and speak up? That's actually like, you can almost feel it'll be a little bit jittery, but it might be kind of alive and be like, okay, I'm probably going to get a little bit nervous. Okay. And what if I simplify and just say, I don't like how this is going. Can we change it? And say it out loud. Get used to your voice actually coming through for you, for hearing your own voice. For a lot of us, sometimes we do it in our head and we don't ever actually physicalize it and put it into this physical reality. Put it in words, in writing, and then say it out loud. And you can do this before you're actually in space or confrontation with another human being. But then you've actually gotten your body on your side and a felt experience of it. And then you grip it and rip it. You don't fake it till you make it, because you can't fake this shit, okay? You just can't. You grip it and rip it, and you say, no matter what, I'm going to be with me. That doesn't mean I'm going to fight tooth and nail and go down on this hill, okay? That's where a lot of us get confused. It's no matter what, even if I put this out there and it turns out that I've entirely operated on misinformation and made bad assumptions and this person corrected them, that means I'm going to be willing to say I'm sorry to that person and sorry to myself. if I go and I open my mouth and I'm sure that this time I'm going to follow through, but then they get angry and I say, okay, never mind, it's fine. I'm going to be with myself all the way through that and say, hey, we got this farther. That's one more rep. That's a little bit farther than we got last time. Or, hey, let me try again maybe tomorrow, because sometimes it might be that we're ready to have it, another person might be. And if you're sensitive or aware, you might know it just may not be the right time, You can use that excuse to put it off forever. You can also use it with wisdom and know that sometimes those things actually can affect it. But again, just be a scientist and run the experiment full out, collect your data, and then say, okay, what can I do with this? Now at the end, and you're just like, that was a shit show, everything went wrong, and I have no idea how to interpret this positively, that is when it is really, really super helpful to have a coach in your back pocket. That's why there are people like me, there's millions of us who are talking about how to get out of the habit of self-abandonment, how to change your mindset and the way that you're perceiving yourself, the way that you're interpreting the data. And a lot of what I talk about will be trauma, because that'll help get you out of the judgment about why you're struggling with it in the first place, why you're misinterpreting the data, why you're actually doing exactly what you need to do in order to heal and change. It just doesn't look that way. Sometimes you just need to hear it because you get an outside perspective. So having a coach is super, super helpful when it comes to this, okay? So bottom line, because we're at time. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I talked this long. Yeah, how do I speak up? I just start talking, okay? Get curious. Instead of waiting to get pissed, instead of waiting to life to wedge you between a rock and a hard place before you're willing to speak up, be willing to do it before you feel ready. Okay, and get curious about, what do I want to say? What is the outcome I'm actually going for? Because if it's about changing somebody else's behavior, that's a big pause, okay? Got to reevaluate. But is it for me? What do I stand to gain if I do it or don't do it? What am I protecting by doing it or not doing it? And what was the other one? Then what else is possible? How can this go better than I can? And then even ask your angels, please direct the words that are coming out of my mouth. Let them, and then you can even visualize this. And sometimes, here's something that I've actually used. Okay, one more tip. I know I'm so bad at introducing new information at the end. I put my hand on my heart to remind myself this is what I'm trying to connect to when I want to speak. And a lot of times that can also be a signal to whoever's receiving that I'm actually really trying to communicate in a different way. And that can be a visual cue, and you just have to get out of your head about what somebody else is going to think, and if it looks stupid, who gives a shit if it actually helps, okay? It will help you connect to you, but then your message is a heartfelt message, and then ask your spirit team to be like, bless it, it's going to be messy, it's going to be ugly, because I don't have a lot of practice in this, because I want to see me change this for myself and have more confidence in this. The confidence is going to come from the practicing and continuing to show up. It's perseverance. It's that grit. That is where the confidence to speak up with confidence is going to come from. So I hope this helps. And right before I end, I want to invite you and to keep tuning into the self-love experiment, to know its confidence comes through doing, just showing up, and that can look like a number of things, a bunch of different activities. It's all about the attitude of how to do it, but I'm being a real life example and sharing more of me, because that's actually how I'm learning how to show up and love myself more, is to be more transparent. Like, I always feel like I'm an open book, everybody can see it, but I don't often always share a ton about my personal life because I've been so much under the belief that nobody's interested in that. So this is actually a lived experiment, and I'm giving you guys the front row and backstage. Backstage is the word. And then also, Love Yourselves is enrolling. This is the year-long self-love experiment of how do I actually do this? How do I get the confidence to speak up with confidence? That's what I want. That's what we're going to work on in Love Yourselves. Because you get group coaching to see a bunch of other badasses, because having community is amazing. other people who are willing to face their yuckity muck and say, but I want something else enough to actually look at this. That's nice. They're inspiring. And you get individual sessions so that you won't fall through the cracks. You don't have to wait for anybody to ask questions because you still aren't an expert at speaking up. So you get your own time where you don't have to compete with anybody. And then you get a coach in your back pocket of, I just blew it. What the fuck? How do I interpret this to where it's not just, I suck? And that's where I'm actually available on Messenger. So I would highly encourage you to check out the Love Yourselves program. It is my baby, and I am loving that people are in it and enjoying it because I like showing up this way. This is what I like talking about, all right? And that's another thing of sometimes it's easier to be confident about what you're talking about when you like what you're talking about, okay? So getting clear on what it is you want to say and having it being something that's going to elevate instead of blow shit up, although sometimes that's unavoidable. And it's all okay. It's all invitations to love yourself. And good luck. Feel free to drop in the comments and let me know how your experiments have gone. And if you're curious about the Love Yourselves program, but not exactly sure, then let's have a call for clarity and we'll see how that might fit into your life and your goals. Alrighty, I love you. I will see you next week on Power Hour. Mwah.